Good morning and welcome back to Compound Conversations. I am Jesse.
And I'm Julie.
And today we're talking about the wrong questions everybody asks about AI and what the right question is. Today, we're hoping you'll leave with three things. One, you'll learn how to catch the wrong question when you or someone in your company is talking about it. Two, learn how to ask the right one. And three, learn how to run a split that will help you to figure out what's judgment, what's executable, what should be staying with the human, and what should ultimately go with an agent. So I don't know about you, but one of the first questions I get asked all the time about AI is, what tool should I be using?
Right.
Followed by like, what tasks can AI do? It's not a particularly strategic question. I think it reflects that we're all trying to figure this thing out. Um, but I'm curious, Julie, like it can feel like a productive question. And I think it's well meaning. Why is it the wrong question?
Yeah, I think what we find in compound every time, I mean, and even in just even separate clients that we have, right, is that the question is what AI tool do I implement?
Yes.
And so what we want to kind of walk the group through today is there's the goal orientation
Hmm.
and then there's the task orientation.
Yeah.
And most of the time we start with questioning around which of our existing tasks could AI do? And believe it or not, that's the wrong question because when we start with that question, even if you think about it from a human emotional standpoint of view, the minute we start asking what are the tasks that AI can do, there's a human side that comes up and says, wait a minute, I'm trying to be replaced.
Yes,
And
yes.
that's not the
And that's a
case.
real fear that a lot of
Yes.
people have. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners have, because I think most of us care about our people.
Right.
I think most of us, as frustrated as we might get sometimes, like I
Yes.
think most of us care about our people. We want to do right by our people. And we have a little bit of ambivalence around this idea that there's this technology we're hearing is going to replace all of our people. And we think, gosh, we really need to implement this technology to be successful, to be productive, yada, yada, yada. But at the same time, like I go to this kid's football games, right?
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think that's well founded.
Yeah. So I think when we ask those task oriented questions, the first thing you're going to get is just kind of this emotional reaction that you then have to all of a sudden reframe
Hmm.
so that you can start asking the right question, which is around what are the outcomes
Yes,
we're trying to get to.
that's a really, really important, and I think sometimes can be a subtle distinction. Can you
Yes.
can you press on that a little bit?
Yeah. So even if you think of take the standard org chart. I mean, sometimes I like to start there. Like when you're asking task oriented questions, you're just kind of talking about the org chart.
Yes.
And when you're asking outcome questions, you're really pressing into what am I actually doing? Because if you think about it, I don't know exactly what you do every day. You don't know exactly what I do every day, right? And
Right.
so, but when we're talking about what are the outcomes that we need, then we can back into the tasks. And that lens that people are going to use on it is, oh my gosh, they're just taking my job away. All of a sudden, it reframes the discussion and starts the discussion out on a nice path as opposed to a what are we doing here? So I
Well,
think
I think
that's
that,
one of the
and I think that
keys.
outcome question is even important for the people.
Yeah.
I was talking with Harley, who's producing our show, about this the other day, and we were talking about her role and her role in marketing. And I was telling her, there is a distinction between the sentence, um, Harley creates social posts,
Mhm.
and the sentence, Harley makes sure social posts are completed, right? And for many people, those two things are synonymous.
Mhm.
But as we were talking, I was saying, if we think about that second sentence, that the posts are completed, we can now start thinking about a lot of ways that outcome can
Mhm.
obtain. We could, for instance, go to Upwork and hire a whole cadre of people,
Right.
each doing a different post every day. And Harley's role would be responsible for making sure those get turned in on time. Now, we're not going to go and I'm not going to go and manage Bernadette or John, whoever it is we hire in the
Mhm.
Philippines or from Upwork or whatever. It would be Harley's responsibility to make sure it will have been done.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think even if we're not talking about AI,
Right.
getting really, really clear on what is the state of the world we want to see obtain when this work is completed is almost always going to lead us to a more productive outcome and probably a more interesting outcome than do this task.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And they, like you said, they sound very much the same. But I mean, as you're listening to us talking about, think about the difference in that question.
Yeah.
From a business owner, from a CEO lens, I want the thing done,
Yes.
right? And if we're, and I don't necessarily want to know in this example, the 12 things that Harley does,
Right.
although those 12 things are important to getting
Yes.
the outcome. But I don't care. I want the thing done. I want it done the way we decided it was going to be done and, check mark. So that's the difference between that goal orientation and that task orientation. And to go back to that example one more time, if you use the Harley example, right? Think about how it feels to be Harley
Yes.
and say, wow, he trusts me.
Yeah.
I can get my job done. And to come back to come where we're at today, and I can think about myself. I can use the discretion to say, how am I going to get this done? And how empowering that feels to the person doing the job versus AI is going to take all of my work away.
It feels
And
like the difference between micromanaging and managing,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
good
yeah,
managers are responsible for making sure that their departments, their companies, whatever it is, does the thing that the strategy, the vision, the owner, whatever it is,
right.
wants to make sure is accomplished. The micromanaging supervisor or manager is the one that's kind of looking over your shoulder, like, oh, no, don't do it. Don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. At least that's the impression
Right.
that I have in
Yeah.
my head.
Yeah. That's a really good one. I never thought about that one. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly. And that's the difference of people wanting to stay with you is, we've all had a micromanager.
Yeah, and they're terrible.
Right.
They're
Think
terrible.
about the one that you've had. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you're talented.
Right.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you're somebody that's smart and able to figure things out and you've got someone else who's, trying to breathe over your shoulder, like, dude, I got this.
Right.
Right? Like,
Right.
I know I can do this job. Like,
Right.
I'm doing this really well. And I think when we talk about AI, one of the things I was having dinner with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about agents and agentification. And, you and I have said this before, a lot of people don't even know what agents are. And this buddy of mine said, well, we've all been working with agents forever. We just call them humans, right?
Hmm.
And as we were talking about agentic management. The only difference between I shouldn't say the only difference, a big difference between an agent in a workplace and a human in a workplace is um, uh, that the agent is digitally native working on digital things. But as we were talking, I was telling him, when you're trying to manage an agentic workforce, you really want to be clear on what the outcome is that you need these things to do. Because then if you're really clear on that, you can then spin up a couple of agents and then they can go do that work. In a way, I think one of the easiest ways we can start to simplify what can feel like a really, really complex thing
Hmm.
is to start with the human and the way we all operate, and then just say, "Look, we're gonna take this and apply it in a slightly different direction." So if you're a manager, if you're a good manager
Hmm.
who's good at setting direction, who's good at understanding outcomes, who's not trying to micromanage the task,
Right.
there's a good chance your humans are going to do a pretty good job.
Yes. Yes.
It's also the case
Hmm.
that if you teach your humans how to do that kind of work, your agents, when you get to that point, will also do a
Hmm.
pretty good job. Now, this raises another really interesting question. Okay, if it's true that agents and humans, when it comes to the digital world, can do a lot of these same tasks, there's a Venn diagram that has some significant overlap.
Hmm.
How do we start to think about what stays with the human, what goes with an agent? Let's assume that we now believe outcomes are the way to think about things.
Okay. All right.
How do we start to make a distinction within an outcome framework about what goes in column A and what goes in column B?
Well, I think there's a couple of things you need to think about is, like, first of all, task orientation. I like to say it has kind of a specific failure mode.
Oh, interesting. What does that mean?
So when you start with a task, you're auditing what the people are doing, right? So think
Mm,
about it in an audit, kind of like an audit sense.
okay.
So you're auditing what those people are doing and you're looking for what AI can handle as opposed to, again, when we go to the outcome, we're kind of bringing that in a different lens. Because if we start with that and just say, well, what can AI handle?
Mm,
as opposed to we talk about work deconstruction.
Yes.
So one of compounds terms is work deconstruction, right? So we talk about how do we reconstruct that work or deconstruct that work so that we can say this is a human task, this is an agentic task, and that's just a slightly different twist,
Yeah.
but it really starts looking at the the outcome that you're trying to get and then what's the most efficient way to go at that without always thinking human. I mean,
Yes.
think about when a lot of times I'll work with people on like an organizational redesign or redeployment, the accountability chart kind of types of things.
Yeah.
We always start with the people. And we say, if we think about our org chart, I'm going to put Jesse here and Julie here and Harley here and Joe here. And this is what because we know, because we as humans know what they do. And the minute you kind of break that paradigm and say, let's not talk about the people, love the people, but let's talk about what we need the organization to accomplish.
Yes.
And then we chart that out and then we apply the people in. Now, there might be gaps. There's almost always gaps, right?
Yes.
I could put Jesse into this role, but he needs to have a little bit more on this. Or I can put Julie in this role. She needs to have a little bit more on that. Then we can figure that piece out. And let's think about how we implement agents into that space, right? So we want to just be sure that we're not asking those, I'm going to say those task oriented failure mode questions that again, we're setting ourselves up for not getting to the right question. Because that's the big part of, catch. We've got to catch the wrong question
Yes.
so that we can ask the right question. And so,
And the
anyway,
wrong questions are typically going to be related around tools and
yes,
tasks.
yes,
The
yes.
right reframe is going to be around outcomes. As I was listening to you, it made me think of when we started going through EOS.
Mhm,
Um, and one of the first exercises that Ryan, our implementer, took us through was the accountability chart. And it was almost exactly what you were saying. It wasn't like what does John do or what does Cynthia do or what does Marina do? It's what are the outcomes we need the organization to be responsible for?
mhm,
And what are the roles we need to construct in order to make sure those outcomes obtain. Then we were going in and filling out the various boxes. And in some cases, we realized we needed to change the shape of some of
mhm.
the boxes or some of the people
Right,
inside of the boxes.
right.
It's no different when you start thinking about AI. I think we've got this idea that because AI is a software that I can sort of look at, and again, I think most of us conflate AI and agents and chatbots, and we'll do a whole series on that.
Right.
But I think because most of us have this idea that AI is sort of a chatbot that a human micromanages,
Right.
we don't really have the lens. We don't bring the accountability chart lens. We don't bring that outcome
Mhm,
lens. And I think one of the really helpful ways to kind of distinguish or start drawing this line between um, humans and between AI is the difference between like humans living in the world of decisions and discretion and judgment and direction. And AI is really moving more in the execution kind of
mhm,
phase. When we start thinking about wrong questions, right questions, what are these individual, what can AI help with? What can people do? When I think about this from a management lens, I think, okay, we've all had experiences with AI where you start a conversation and it goes pretty well. And then but then either you run out of tokens or you run out of context and you need to start a new conversation. You have to re-educate the thing all over,
right.
right? AI has no memory. And that becomes a problem, particularly at scale.
Mhm,
But humans do,
mhm,
right? AI doesn't know or care what you want to do from a business standpoint.
mhm. Right.
Hopefully your humans do,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so starting with this idea that humans have what we would call in industry a world model. They have a set of experiences. They have a set of values. They have a set of goals. Things in that space are where we want to move more and more and more work uh, into that, into the person.
Mhm,
But in order to do that, there's so many things humans have to do. Log
mhm.
into this app, click on this thing, download that thing. upload
Mhm.
this thing,
Mhm.
send this thing here, right?
Right.
And before long, instead of us doing something like strategy planning, we're actually just moving a bunch of crap from
Right.
Slack to Word, from Word to Google Docs, and from Google Docs.
Right.
And like, that's not value added
Right.
work. That's
Right.
great work
Right.
for an AI,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I
right?
think that's a really good example. I'll go back to the well, a couple things I want to go back to. So one is when I want to step into outcomes one more time.
Yep.
Because if we think in the terms of outcomes, which is exactly where you're going from a human and AI agent standpoint of view,
Mhm.
when we think about outcomes, there's almost always a shared responsibility.
Yes.
So outcomes are an outflowing of identifying a shared responsibility
Yes.
every time. I mean, even the example you gave with Harley, right? It was, she can either she needs other things, there's shared responsibilities to get to the outcome. And if we simply switch our mindset to that and we think about that shared outcome, now we can start thinking about, is it the human or is it the agent that can do that work?
In the human context, when you talk about a shared responsibility, I feel like I have an intuition of what that means. Are you talking about within the context of a department? You're talking about a manager and their team?
Organization. Like I was thinking it more organizationally, right? Most outcomes require multiple people to share getting that across the finish line.
So in the case, for instance, let's take this as an example. So at some point, this conversation, which we're recording at the moment, is going to have to be uploaded to, I don't know, Spotify and Apple, wherever podcasts
Yeah,
go,
right.
and those are going to have to get broken up into clips that are going to go on all the other things that
Mhm.
that we do. And so Harley's got responsibility for making sure all of that stuff happens.
Right.
But then you and I also have the responsibility to make sure that we're having this conversation and that we're prepared for it and that we're, giving Harley hopefully helpful feedback on how is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's a very good example because even if you use the first piece,
Mhm.
so even if we say produce podcast, get podcast onto podcast in the sky, break it into clips, that is a shared responsibility that Harley has,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So she has to have other tools. So maybe if you want to broaden shared responsibility into multi-tool responsibility, it could either be people shared or tool shared. But there are multiple things that have to go into that outcome in order to make that happen. And so that's a very good example of work deconstruction of that task to say, okay, now we have all of these things. Now, think if you gave Harley that task, right?
Yep.
Harley, you're going to do this, and you didn't give her any tools, didn't give her cameras, didn't give her platforms, didn't give her media, and said, go ahead and do that. Like that's a much harder task. I'm not even sure how it would get done.
Right.
But those are when you think about that shared outcome having shared responsibilities, the outcome having shared responsibilities. That's a good example. And then I'll go back to the org chart
Wait, so
again.
real quick before you do that,
Yeah.
would you make a distinction in this case though between tools and direction? So I could also envision a world where I would say, okay, Harley, you've got all these tools, like go figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, like I'm not a particularly helpful person. In reality, I hope I am. But I've been in environments before where um, you have clients or employees who or bosses more often who
Mm-hmm.
will give you stuff and say, "Well, I gave you everything you need. Like, why can't you figure this out?"
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But what they aren't giving you is a lot of helpful, constructive feedback and direction. So as you're talking about shared responsibility, you're talking about tools. Is direction a part of that as well? Like, what are some of the other facets of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's actually a really good question. I mean, I think yes, it's important, but to be able to get down to go back to the agentic side of things,
Mhm.
right? We've got to go through that shared outcome and who owns the outcome so that then, and kind of only then, can we figure out what the human is responsible and what the AI workforce can look like and how we design that outcome deliverable together. And so I think that that's just really important to think through that. And, when you're thinking about organization, when you're thinking about your examples, right?
Yeah.
It's a different way to think about things
Yes,
because
it really is.
org charts, are defined for humans.
Yes.
And I think the org chart of the future, I think the job description of the future, I think, all of those people practices are going to start looking different because we have to think about how do we incorporate that agentic workforce and then how do we manage that. But we've got to start with that outcome. We've got to stop asking the wrong question,
Yep.
right? And start asking the right question around those outcomes. And then how do we deconstruct that work so we know where we can efficiently and effectively have human and agentic workforce together.
So I kind of want to press on this point. I want to press on this point a little bit because I actually feel like what you just said in terms of the way org charts and everything will change is is really profound. So when we think about this idea of the micromanager versus the manager, we think about tasks versus outcome. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the course that I taught at Michigan State. I'm thinking about training my own team, and I begin to realize that the skills that a person needs to have in order to move towards this new paradigm are in a lot of ways really fundamentally different than the
Mhm,
way we prepare people today, the way we hire today. I think about schools, right? So in
mhm,
schools, you learn some things and then you take some tests and then you get a result. In a way, it's sort of very, very task driven. I mean, I think really good teachers will find ways to try and create learning goals that are outcome driven. But
mhm,
I think by and large, there's a lot of sort of task orientation that follows
mhm.
you through school. Because what I find is that when you then get into the workforce and the people are responsible for constructing the outcomes that they're like, a lot of people really just want to be told
Yes,
what to do
right.
and how to do it.
Mhm, mhm,
Right. And yet, and I see this all the time, maybe because I'm in technology, people are just especially worried about
mm.
breaking things, even though it's very difficult to break many,
Right,
many things, at
right,
least for consumers. Like
right.
it's very easy for me to break a lot of things.
Yeah,
I'm in the code,
right.
but for like you or somebody else, it's not
Right,
that easy.
yeah,
We try to prevent users from,
right.
we protect users from themselves.
Right, right.
But for the most part, but you see, I see it all the time.
Mhm.
There's kind of this fear, like if I need to learn how to do the things. I don't want to break the thing. What I'm hearing as I think about what you're saying, and I think about the work of the future, is as we move to a world where agents can execute more things in the information and digital realms. Really, we need to start thinking about how do we develop humans? How do we train humans? How do we find humans that are really good at setting direction, understanding outcomes? In a way, I think from a business or an organization standpoint, we've got to get better at connecting people to the organization's mission, values. People have to understand it in a deeper way how they
Mhm,
fit into the mission of the thing
mhm.
rather than like we hired you to be a tech to do this thing, go do this job,
Right.
right? I don't know. This is this is kind of how I'm kind of landing as I'm listening
Mhm,
to what you're
mhm,
saying. It
mhm.
really is changing how people really do need to think about the work in the future.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's mindset shift, right? Like AI is not what tool do you want to put in,
Right.
right? I mean, that's what brings us to compound. That's what brings everyone right now into the space of I need to do something, I don't know what.
Right.
Right? I mean, that is basically the big question out there right now is I know I need to do something with AI. Everybody's I'm talking to is talking about doing something with AI, but I
Yes.
don't know what my something is.
Right.
And so then we say, let's just get which tool. So we start focusing on the tool. Which tool, which tool. And so with your like you were talking about with mission vision value and that connection, right? When we get an organization connected to the mission vision value, it's very much a very whole connection to the organization, right? Because we're thinking about things differently. We're thinking about what I do, but we're thinking about how I do it. And does my how
Mm,
align with the organization? So let's kind of flip that and go back to that outcomes, right? Only when we're asking the right question about how should the human and the AI workforce be designed together to deliver that outcome are we thinking with a mission, vision, value esque mindset. And so that is so important to have the organization to start to understand that. I mean, I would say to anybody who's listening to the show, like in a meeting, just try it. Ask a question in a meeting. When you're talking about someone, have to your group say, go around the room and tell me what outcomes you're responsible for.
And
I'm
it's hard. I mean,
It's
I remember
hard.
when we did this with the accountability chart the first time,
Yes.
our orientation was to think about the tasks.
I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. Now, what is the outcome? What is the value you're bringing to the organization? And you could even add to your lens, right? That aligns with our mission, vision, values,
Yep.
and talk to me about that. And that kind of starts that mindset shift, because what we're saying here is you kind of think about asking the right one. We talked about we're going to catch the wrong question, we're going to ask the right one. Part of asking the right one is understanding that sequence matters. The sequence matters because it's outcomes first, accountability second.
Accountability meaning who's responsible for the outcome.
Right.
And
Right.
that, just to be clear, is always going to be a human.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
But go on.
Design third, tool fourth. Tool fourth.
Yeah.
Like, that's the aha moment here, right? Tool fourth? Wait, no, I want to know what tool I need to buy. Wait a minute, I thought I was going to log in here today and you were going to tell me what tool to buy.
Right.
No, we're not going to.
Claude. No.
Right. Yeah, we could put in a shameless
Yeah.
plug. So every step in that sequence is doing the work that gets you to the right steps.
Yes.
Right. But you have to, like, that outcome, that discussion has to be reversed. And once you do that, the discussion becomes richer. And then again, the human side doesn't say, oh, hey, they're trying to figure out how to place me. They're saying, oh, hey, we're trying to figure out how we can do neater, cooler, more awesome things with this human. And by the way, you can determine how to utilize AI to do some of these tasks that don't need human intervention right now.
And by the way, I'll say this. I know you're the HR person, but as I've seen this implemented in my own team, and we talked about Harley earlier. One of the things that's been great working with her is that um, you show her kind of like, hey, this is where we're trying to go, and she's young and she's creative, and she'll start thinking of a lot of ways to start getting there. And she's showing me things I didn't know anything about with different
Mhm.
tools,
Right.
because at some level, like, I can't possibly know all of the tools. I understand the architecture, the
Right. Right.
framework, the structure, the outcomes
Right.
we're trying to get towards.
Mhm.
And so when we're clear with her about the outcome, she finds all sorts of interesting ways to start moving in that direction. Marina, our integrator, who was probably the most AI resistant, now is building most of our agents, because she says, okay, my job is to be responsible for all of these other organizational outputs. And now, I mean, she gets blocked on something, and she's like, let me go build an agent. Let me
Right.
go build some agent teams, right? And so
Right.
now she's probably the most prolific developer. The developers might disagree. She's probably the most prolific developer at
Right.
this point of agents, because that one shift happened. Let's step into this a little bit more concretely, though. So let's imagine now I want to actually um, start to deconstruct a role,
Mhm.
and I want to start thinking about, okay, I buy the idea that we need to start thinking about outcomes, not necessarily tasks. But the reality is that there's still a lot of tasks that need to get done.
Mhm. Right. Right.
So as we start thinking about how do we do this concretely, what I would encourage you to do is first pick a role and then list a bunch of tasks that that person does in a week relative to the outcome you want them to accomplish. So, for example, let's imagine we have a project coordinator, right? And we say, okay, the project coordinator's job, their outcome that they're responsible for, is to make sure our work gets done on time, on budget, communicated to clients. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so if we were to sit down with this project coordinator and start deconstructing some of their tasks to say, okay, well, they've got to manage scope change requests. They've got to coordinate client and delivery teams. They've got to schedule meetings. They've got to send status meetings. They've got to track deliverables. They've got to negotiate timeline adjustments. They've got to flag overdue items, right? You start going through task by task by task by task by task,
Mhm.
right? A natural line for me would be then to then start saying, okay, we have this list of tasks. We believe and we know that humans need to be living in the world of judgment, outcome, goal orientation, strategy, all those things. Agents can then live in the space of execution, drafting, doing the work. So I would then take each of those tasks and start to segment them.
Mm-hmm.
Managing scope change requests. So that requires judgment. Let's put that in the human column. Scheduling meetings doesn't really require a lot of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Let's delegate that to an agent. Sending status emails. You might say that there's some judgment there, but really most of the time it's just gathering information from multiple sources
Right.
and then sending that out.
Right. Right.
Doesn't really require a lot of judgment. We can
Mm-hmm.
put that in the agent column,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can take coordinating client and delivery teams, so making sure that that all the work is well scoped and well defined. That feels like it requires a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, doesn't mean that AI can't help you with some of that, but at the end of the day, it feels like that's kind of where a human should really be spending their time. So I think if we're going to start walking people, so let's start walking people through this kind of an exercise. If someone wants to say, okay, I buy this idea of outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
how do I start? How do I start making the distinctions, and what tools can we share to be able to make that happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in a couple of episodes, we're going to talk about the hybrid accountability chart. So I would encourage everybody to come back specifically because we really take a deep dive into, that deconstruction, right? But I think the when we deep dive into that, and I keep, for whatever reason, I'm stuck on org charts today, right? But that's where I'm going to be. The org chart is just such a visible part of organizations. And that looking at those two things, like those examples that you just gave were very good. And I'm going to guess for those listening, when Jesse talked about the emails that could go out, people were probably like, oh, I don't want an agent sending out emails for me, right? But even if you took that particular task, I'm going to just take one task and take it to that level you were talking about. If I take that one task and I say, normally it takes me an hour to compile all of those emails and get them out. And I have that set aside on my calendar right here to do that. The agent can do 99% of it, and you just give it a quick look over to be sure it's got your human touch.
Yes.
Modify a few words. Maybe it doesn't sound exactly like you. It might say, hi, Jesse, instead of I might say, hey, what's up? Right? Like you can teach that too. But my point is, if you want to have that touch point, you can still take that. So if you just take that one task
And by
out
the way,
of the ones
just whether you make that decision to let the agent say it or not,
Yeah.
send it or not, is a human judgment.
right?
Right. So I might be very comfortable.
Good point.
I might be
Yeah.
very comfortable being like, yeah, you know what? Just send out the status emails. I don't need to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
You might not be.
Right.
Like that, but that
Great
right
point.
there is exactly where you start to draw the boundaries between your different organizational culture, between human judgment. Like
Mm-hmm.
the agent can't, I would say, okay, I guess it could theoretically, it ought not to make
Mm-hmm.
that decision for you. That is a decision. Whether you let the agent do that work or not is a decision
Right.
reserved to the domain of humanity.
Right.
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 Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Yeah.
you.
No, that's
But
a very
I
good
wanted
point.
to make that
That's a very good
distinction
point.
because I
Right.
think as I was listening to you, I was like, this alone
Right.
is an example of making that decision.
Yes,
that judgment.
yes. And I love that example because it is. And because we say, oh, well, we don't have that human touch. Yes, you do. I mean, that's an excellent example to say, no, the human still had a space in that execution
Yes.
of that deliverable, of that outcome. There was still human interaction. Did it look different? Sure.
Yeah.
Was it more effective? Sure. But there still had to be that interaction. So I think it was a great place to jump in. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to map, we like to talk about mapping one role against two columns.
Yes.
So if you think about, again, the outcome of the role,
Mhm.
we can take that and again, just try it. We get so stuck sometimes on it's got to be right. Well, right is starting versus not starting.
Also, it's a human judgment.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So we talk about mapping one role against two columns. So if you think about a role and outcome, and then you create, literally just do a T chart. We're all comfortable with T charts by at this point in time, right? But put human and agent. And then deconstruct that role into two columns. and see what it looks like. I mean, it's a fascinating exercise and it's a human judgment exercise.
Yes.
And if we go back to where we started this morning at, is we think about the task orientation versus the goal orientation, asking the right question versus the wrong. And if you go to a let's take this role or one role, two columns, that's a refreshing conversation.
Yes. And by the way, we've made this really easy for people. So we've created this handout that you can download. We'll link to it wherever this thing is published, um, where you can go through this exercise step by step. And it's literally 3 steps, right?
Mhm.
So once you're clear on the outcome, the first step is just to pick a role. It doesn't really matter what role it is, especially when you're just getting started.
Right.
Pick
Right.
a role and list out the tasks that lead to that outcomes having been accomplished.
Hmm.
Then sort each task. And I like to start easy with judgment versus execution.
Right.
Then sort each one of those tasks that you've got. Column A, judgment. That's the human column. Just
Hmm.
every one of those tasks that requires judgment, put it into column A. Every task that is just moving information around or
Right.
execution, put it into column B. And that alone is going to give you a really good heuristic
Hmm.
for starting to not only deconstruct your work, but being able to figure out which work is expressly reserved for the human and which work you can possibly or probably start to delegate. We call this exercise the role splitter. And again, we'll link to it so that way you can download it.
Hmm.
It's one page, front and back, really, really easy. You can,
Hmm.
I'm actually going through it right now as we're talking. It's really, really easy way to start to take what can feel really complex
Hmm.
and simplify it.
Hmm.
Right. This
Yeah.
is what we did when we were thinking about that project coordinator role.
Hmm.
At some level, this is what we do when we're trying to define our roles now.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to make this really, we want to make this easy for people so that they know what they can find and where they can find it. Because this can feel really,
Hmm.
I think, really intimidating if you're not
Hmm.
used to thinking like
Hmm.
this. So
Hmm.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Oh no, no. I think that this has been a good tool, and that's why we say it's mapping that one role,
yeah,
right? I mean, but you've got to map it in two columns.
yes,
It's not a org chart box anymore.
correct.
It's two columns. And when that question, um, I'm going to say that question of thinking about that role, it does a couple things. Like I'm going to say, kind of like simultaneously, right? So it's going to because it's an outcome question. It's
Mhm.
not a task question, right? So it forces the conversation. This tool forces the conversation of outcomes.
Yes,
It's one of the reasons I love
yes,
this tool.
yes,
This is
yes,
a
yes,
tool that forces the conversation of outcomes. And, if we go back to earlier asking just the question in the room, use a tool,
yes,
right? Because every single client I have, we talk about outcomes. And part of that is just it's drudgery in the beginning. It's like, oh,
yeah.
why are you asking me about outcomes? Or I was in a meeting the other day and we were struggling around outcomes. And I said to somebody, I said, what's the headline for your position?
What does that mean? Like, what was the,
Like, what is your ultimate mission, vision, value for your role? Right.
okay?
I was like, what's your headline? And it was just like uncomfortable room quiet. We're like, uh, and we got there and I was like, so think about it in this way, think about that. But anyway, this tool forces that outcome conversation to where the accountability lives.
Yes,
And that's why this process is really important because if you go back to that sequence we talked about, right? We're right now in a time where we're all starting with the tool.
yeah,
And that's why when we get to the McKinsey and the MIT and all of the stats right now that are talking about the failure rate with AI adaptability, it's because that sequence, we're starting with the tool versus the outcome.
yes,
And so this example is gonna, before anyone touches a tool, let's produce alignment on the narrative.
yeah.
And we can use this instrument to talk about that narrative.
One of the things that you said that I loved and I want to underscore is how this becomes the starting point for discussion. I'm thinking about the very first time that I ran something like this with Marina. And so if I were to look at this one, so we've got an example, and we'll link to this. Um, on the example inside of the worksheet, we did a deconstruction of a project coordinator role. And one of the things that's in column B, and this goes back to your example from earlier, is the sending of weekly status emails. So we ultimately decided we were going to delegate that particular task to an agent.
Mm-hmm.
Marina was not comfortable with that
Mm-hmm.
at the very beginning,
Right.
right? And so there was a fair amount of conversation that we had deciding whether this belonged in column A or
Mm-hmm.
column B,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at the end of the day, I don't think it matters what you decide for yourself. What matters is that you make the decision and you have the conversation so that then you're aligned. And so once we ultimately aligned on this idea that, okay, this is going to go into column B, at least now we know, okay, this goes into column B. We have there's a domino of things we'll talk about later about how you then manage that system and that process and hold the agents accountable. But just by making that decision, we now know that uh, when this thing doesn't go well,
Mm-hmm.
we will know where to look and we will know how to tweak it. And if it does go well, we'll know that too.
Right.
So I think that this idea of having that conversation
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
so important. I hadn't really thought about this like that when we were first constructing this. Um, but you're right. It really is a conversation piece. And that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
big differences in the way we want to approach this is AI isn't about a person with a chatbot. It's about teams working together to figure out new ways to work. You have to have these conversations if you're going to have shared
Oh,
responsibility
sure.
towards your ultimate outcomes.
Right. Right. Well, and to the, to the CEO, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the responsibility is shareholder revenue, right? And those things will happen if we're delivering the work in a different way with adapting AI tools.
Yes.
We talked last week. It's not the adoption, it's the design.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to say, if we as CEOs, if we want to optimize and start feeling the impact on our P&L from the headcount paradox, right? We're not growing linearly, but we're still growing, but we can do more with our human resources, which is really good based upon where we're at from a world population standpoint. So that's like a really good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not, oh, our jobs are going away. No, it's a really good thing because we're going to do a lot of great things for the economy, right?
Yeah.
But it's understanding the headcount paradox. Yes, we can do that from a CEO perspective. It's understanding that it's not the tool, it's not the adoption, it's the design. And that's what leads us to this conversation is how do I do that design?
Yeah.
Because asking the right question also changes who's in the room.
Yeah.
Because a task question, where we started with the difference between task oriented questions and goal oriented questions, right?
Yep.
The task question can be answered, by the person in the role, if you want to say, with a list of current work responsibilities, right? I can do that. I can do the task. But the goal question requires that the leadership then, going back to your mission, vision, value, right? The goal question, which focuses on the outcomes, gets the organization doing work in a much different way, which does hit your P&L in a
Yes.
positive,
100%.
But you have to take the time for design, which again, this tool is one of those that helps you get there so that you're talking about outcomes and goals versus tasks.
So again, this tool is called the Role Splitter, and we will make sure it's available for download wherever we publish this. It's super super simple 3-step exercise. You get clear on your outcome, and then it helps you come up with a really simple heuristic for breaking your work down into what
Mm-hmm.
stays in the human and what goes with the agent.
Mm-hmm.
And the simple way to think about it is just judgment versus execution. You get more nuanced the more you do this, but I think that's probably the best place to start. If it
Mm-hmm.
requires judgment, let's keep it in the domain of the human. If it requires execution, we can probably start moving into column B. But the important thing
Mm-hmm.
is you have the conversation.
Yes.
And that's what this is designed to do. Help you think about the outcome, think about the role, think about the two columns, and then have the conversation so that you can then start to figure out for your company, for your organization, what makes the most sense for you,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
aligns with the way you want to do things.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, it's the question I think that most AI programs never reach, right?
yeah,
And it's the
right.
point that justifies everything upstream.
I think that's actually a really, really profound point. Everything I see, by and large, with respect to AI influencers or AI even providers,
Hmm.
it's almost always about tasks.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you scroll TikTok or Instagram, you're going to see here's how I did this one task a little better with AI.
Hmm.
And again, those are fine as far as they go.
Right.
But if you're trying to figure out how to put this into your organization and you want to see this hit your P&L and you're managing more than one person, i.e. yourself,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
You really do need to take the step back and start thinking about this with a little bit more intention.
Yes. Yeah. Because you can design backwards from that when you start with the outcome.
Right.
And that's, I think, the big takeaway for everybody today, right? Is that it is a design problem,
Yes.
but we have to design backwards from the outcome. And if we do that, what we do know is that you're going to produce a better AI deployment. And at the end of the day, that's what Compound's about, right?
Yeah.
We want more and more organizations to be able to get that positive deployment impact to their organization, to their P&L, to their people by being sure that they put it in the right way and that it's really being effective and productive for their organization. So,
And so our goal for today, as we get ready to wrap, was one, we want to be able to catch the wrong question.
right.
So if you're asking questions around tasks and tools, it's the wrong question.
Right.
We
That's
also
great.
wanted you to be able to understand what the right questions are. And those right questions live around the outcomes and the goals you have for your organization. But then finally, we want to say, well, okay, that's great. That's super, super abstract, though. How
Right.
do I
Right.
actually break this down? And that's where we want to give you the role splitter, which again is free to download, um, to help you understand or to help you take the outcome and the tasks that lead up to it to start splitting naturally down the judgment axis, which goes to humans, and the AI axis, which goes to, well, AI. The
Right.
execution axis, which
Right.
goes to AI. Um, Julie, always a pleasure. I, I
Always.
I always I
Always.
always look forward to these conversations.
I do too.
I
I'm
feel like
always amazed when I look at the clock. I'm like, wait, we're done.
we prepare, and yet even in the conversations, I feel like I'm always learning something new,
Yeah.
and I love that.
Yeah,
So,
I do too.
um,
It's always so nice.
thank you so much for your time.
And what I will say is let's stop transforming and let's start compounding. See you next time.